The smell hit her first. 1,000 candles burning at once, hot wax and perfume, and the sharp green scent of hothouse flowers forced into bloom for the occasion. Wren Marsh stopped 3 steps inside the ballroom doors, and her borrowed shoes stuck to the marble floor. Not literally, but her feet refused to carry her further into the noise and light and sheer overwhelming scale of the Countess of Ashfield's autumn ball. "Move, girl." A woman in emerald silk swept past, her elbow catching Wren's shoulder. "You're blocking the entrance." Wren moved. She moved the way she always did. Too fast, too much. Her hip caught the edge of a gilded side table. A vase of white roses wobbled. She grabbed it with both hands, steadied it, and in doing so knocked a glass of champagne from the tray of a passing footman. The glass shattered on the marble. The footman looked at her the way one looks at a horse that has wandered into a church. "Sorry," Wren said. "I'm so sorry. I'll clean." "Leave it." The footman's voice was ice. She left it, stepped over the spreading puddle of champagne, and pressed herself against the nearest wall, breathing hard. The ballroom stretched before her like a gilded mouth. 300 people, possibly more, all of them dressed in fabrics that cost more than the cottage where she'd grown up. The chandeliers threw prismatic light across everything, and the orchestra played something complicated in a minor key, and the laughter was everywhere. Bright, sharp, practiced laughter that sounded nothing like joy. Lady Marchmont had abandoned her within 60 seconds of arrival. "Find me when you need to leave, dear," she'd said, already gravitating toward a cluster of elderly women near the card room. "Or don't find me. I'll be losing at whist until midnight." Wren pressed her back flat against the wall and catalogued everything she couldn't do. She couldn't read the dance card. The elegant copperplate might as well have been Greek. She couldn't dance. Her father had taught her to shoe horses, not waltz. She couldn't curtsy. She'd practiced on the carriage ride here and nearly put her knee through the floor. She couldn't identify a single soul in this room, couldn't decode the language of fans and gloves and exactly how much cleavage was appropriate for an unmarried woman under 30. What she could do, identify every horse in the stable yard by gait alone, set a fractured bone, start a fire in rain, calm a mare in labor. None of these skills seemed applicable. A woman near the punch table caught her eye and leaned toward her companion. The whisper carried just far enough. "Who let the milkmaid in?" Wren's face burned. Her dress, Lady Marchmont's gift, hastily altered by a village seamstress, was clearly wrong. Too plain, too high at the neck. The fabric was good, but the cut said countryside, and in this room, countryside meant deficient. She found a door. She didn't care where it led, as long as it led away. The terrace was dark and cold, and blessedly empty. Or almost empty. "The roses aren't blooming yet," said a voice from the shadows. "But if you've come out here to be sick, the hedge on the left is more private." Wren squinted into the darkness. A man sat on the stone balustrade, one leg folded beneath him, a glass of something amber balanced on his knee. She could see the outline of him, tall, broad-shouldered, dark hair that he'd pushed back from his forehead as if he'd given up on keeping it neat. "I'm not going to be sick," she said. "Pity. I was hoping for company. I came very close about 20 minutes ago." Wren laughed. It came out too loud, too sudden. A real laugh, nothing like the practiced ones inside. The man turned toward the sound, and even in the dim light she could see his expression shift. Surprise. Something warmer than surprise. "You're hiding," she said, strategically withdrawing. Hiding. Wren crossed to the balustrade and sat on it without invitation, swinging her legs over the edge. Her shoes, the borrowed ones with the heel that was half an inch higher than the other, dangled above the garden below. "I'm hiding too, from all of them. Bad evening. I knocked over a footman's champagne. A woman called me a milkmaid. And I can't read the dance card, so I couldn't dance even if anyone asked, which nobody will, because I don't know how to dance anyway. She said it all in one breath, the way she said everything, without calculation, without filter, without the slightest awareness that she was telling a stranger her most humiliating truths. The man was quiet for a moment. Then, "You can't read?" "No." She waited for pity, condescension, or the careful change of subject she'd learned to expect. She got none of these. "My niece can't either. She's 8. She throws her books at her governess." Smart girl. Violent girl, but yes, also smart. He shifted on the balustrade, turning to face her more fully. In the light from the ballroom windows, she could see his face now. Strong jaw, dark eyes, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile until recently. He was handsome in the way that expensive things were handsome, obviously, irritatingly, without trying. "Why come, if you hate it?" "Lady Marchmont. I'm her companion. She wanted one last season event before she's too old to enjoy complaining about them." "And she brought you as company?" "She brought me because I'm cheap and honest and I don't bore her." Wren pulled a crushed flower from her glove, a foxglove she'd picked from the roadside before they'd arrived. She smoothed its purple petals between her thumb and forefinger, a habit she'd had since childhood, picking wildflowers and pressing them into whatever was nearby. Books she couldn't read, journals she couldn't write in. The collected flowers of a woman who learned the world through touch and smell instead of letters. "She told me London would be an education." "Is it?" "It's teaching me that rich people are very good at saying nothing with a great many words." He laughed. A real laugh, like hers. Sudden, startled, unprepared. It changed his whole face. Made him look younger. Made him look like someone who hadn't laughed enough lately. "I don't know your name," he said. "Wren, like the bird." "Small and loud?" "Small and impossible to catch." She looked at him sideways. "Yours?" "Julian." "Just Julian." He hesitated. A fraction of a second, barely noticeable. But Wren noticed things. She noticed the quality of his coat, the signet ring he'd turned inward on his finger so the crest didn't show. The fact that he was hiding on a terrace instead of dancing inside. "Just Julian," he said. She let it go, not because she believed him, but because she understood the need to be just a name in the dark. "Well, just Julian." She held out the foxglove. "Do you want a flower that's already dying?" He took it. Their fingers touched. Hers rough, calloused, the hands of someone who worked with iron and leather and horseflesh. His warm and dry. He looked at the crushed flower in his palm with an expression she couldn't quite name. "Yes," he said quietly. "I think I do." She saw him again 3 days later in Hyde Park. Lady Marchmont had sent her to walk. "You're making me nervous, girl, pacing like a caged thing. Go exhaust yourself." And Wren had walked until the fashionable paths gave way to the wilder stretches near the Serpentine, where the trees grew thick and the grass wasn't manicured into submission. She came here every morning now. The wilder paths reminded her of home. Julian was standing beside a carriage that had thrown a wheel. Later, she would learn he'd driven this route every day since the ball, hoping to find her walking. At the time, she only saw a broken axle. The driver was swearing under his breath. A footman was attempting to lever the wheel back on, using what appeared to be a decorative walking stick. "That's not going to work," Wren said. Julian looked up. Something happened to his face. A softening, a release. The expression of someone who'd been holding his breath without knowing it. "The lever's too short," she said, already walking toward the carriage. "And you're pushing the wrong direction. Here." She crouched, examined the axle, and found the problem in 3 seconds. "The pins, Shed. You need a replacement, not brute force." The driver stared. "Miss, I hardly think—" "My father was a farrier." Wren was already pulling a hairpin from her tangled bun. "This won't hold long, but it'll get you to a smith. Tell him the flange is worn too. He'll try to charge you for a new axle, but it's just the flange." She jury-rigged the repair in under 4 minutes. Her hands moved with the quick, certain precision of someone who had solved this exact problem 100 times, in rain, in mud, with a horse stamping impatiently beside her. When she stood, her gloves were stained with axle grease, and the driver was looking at her as if she performed a minor miracle. Julian hadn't said a word. He leaned against a tree, watching her with that expression she was beginning to recognize. Surprise layered over something deeper. Admiration, maybe. Or something more dangerous. "You're very capable," he said. "I'm very dirty." She wiped her hands on her skirt before she remembered it was Lady Marchmont's second-best muslin. Oh, that's not coming out." "Probably not." "She's going to kill me." "Probably." Wren looked at him, at the amusement in his dark eyes, the way he was trying and failing not to smile, and felt something turn over in her chest, something warm and inconvenient, and entirely unwise. "Walk with me," she said. Not a question, really. Wreckers didn't ask. They announced. They walked. He asked about horses, and she talked for 20 minutes straight about the difference between hot shoeing and cold fitting, about reading a horse's temperament through its ears, about the morning she'd helped a mare deliver twin foals in a thunderstorm, while her father held the lantern and the barn roof leaked onto both of them. She talked with her hands, gesturing wildly, nearly hitting him twice. He told her about an estate he managed, hundreds of acres, tenant farmers, a crumbling east wing he couldn't afford to repair. He spoke about it the way she spoke about horses, with love and exhaustion, and the specific frustration of someone responsible for something larger than themselves. "You know a lot about agriculture for a gentleman," she said. "You know a lot about everything for someone who can't read. Reading isn't the only way to learn things. My father taught me by showing. I can identify 200 plants by leaf and smell alone. I just can't spell their names. That seems like the better skill. Tell that to the world." They stopped at the edge of the Serpentine. Ducks argued over bread crusts. A child threw a stick for a dog that ignored it entirely. The late afternoon light turned the water copper. "I brought you something," Julian said. He'd been carrying it since the terrace, he admitted, in case he saw her again. He reached into his coat pocket and produced a small book, leather-bound, worn soft at the spine. He opened it, and she saw, pressed between the pages, the foxglove she'd given him on the terrace. Flattened now, its purple faded to violet, but preserved with care. "You kept it," she said. Her voice came out strange, too soft for the Wren she knew herself to be. "I press flowers too." He turned the pages. More specimens, cornflowers, clover, a sprig of dried lavender. "My mother taught me before she died. She was a tenant farmer's daughter. My father saw her at a harvest fair and married her against his family's wishes. She couldn't read when she arrived at the estate. Taught herself at 30, flower by flower, the same way I'm showing you now." Wren stared at the book. A gentleman's pressed flower collection. Something private and tender, and completely at odds with the expensive coat and the signet ring. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked. "Because you handed me a dying flower, and it was the most honest thing anyone has given me in years." She took the book, turned the pages slowly, touching the edge of each pressed specimen with her calloused fingertips. The paper was soft from age. The flowers smelled faintly of dust and memory. When she handed it back, her throat was tight with something she refused to name. "Your trouble," she said. "So I've been told." Lady Marchmont announced on Thursday that they were paying a morning call. She said it casually, but there was something deliberate in her tone that Wren had learned to recognize. The old woman had been steering events since the terrace, and Wren suspected this visit was no accident. "An old friend. Very grand house. Try not to break anything, dear." The house was not merely grand. It was enormous. A pale stone townhouse that took up half the street, with columns and iron railings and a footman at the door whose livery cost more than Wren earned in a year. "Whose house is this?" Wren whispered as they climbed the steps. "The Duke of Thornfield's. I knew his mother. Delightful woman. Terrible taste in husbands." The footman opened the doors. The entrance hall was marble and paintings and a staircase that curved upward like a question mark. And at the top of that staircase, descending with careful, measured steps, was Julian. Not just Julian. Not the man on the terrace or the flower presser in the park. This Julian wore a coat that fit like it had been painted on, a cravat of blinding white, and on his face, the particular expression of someone who has been caught in an act he cannot explain. "Lady Marchmont," the butler announced, "and Miss Marsh." Julian reached the bottom of the stairs. His eyes found Wren's and held. "Lady Marchmont." He bowed, all grace, all polish. "How lovely. It's been too long." 14 years, Thornfield. You were a dreadful child. I see you've grown into a dreadful adult." Lady Marchmont surveyed the entrance hall with the frank assessment of a woman who had stopped being impressed decades ago. "Your mother's taste, I hope? The columns are ghastly." "My grandfather's, I'm afraid." "Worse." Lady Marchmont settled into a chair in the drawing room, as if she'd always lived there. "This is my companion, Miss Marsh. Wren, dear, this is the Duke of Thornfield." Wren stood very still. Her hands, her calloused, grease-stained farrier's daughter hands, hung at her sides. She felt every inch of the distance between the marble floor and the painted ceiling, and in that distance, the entire span of the lie. "We've met," she said. Her voice was flat as hammered iron. Julian's jaw tightened. "Wren, Your Grace?" She curtsied. It was terrible. Too deep, too abrupt, one knee nearly buckling. The worst curtsy in the history of London drawing rooms. She didn't care. "I didn't realize you were a duke. You introduced yourself as Just Julian." Lady Marchmont looked between them with the sharp delight of a woman who has just stumbled onto the most interesting thing that has happened in 14 years. "Oh," she said. "Oh, this is wonderful." Wren did not speak to him for the remainder of the visit. She sat in his drawing room, on his silk-upholstered chair, drinking his tea from his porcelain cup, and said nothing. Lady Marchmont carried the conversation with relish. Julian tried twice to catch Wren's eye. She examined the ceiling, the carpet, the hideous pastoral painting above the fireplace, and the sleeping spaniel by the hearth, in that order. In the carriage home, Lady Marchmont said, "You're angry." "He lied. He omitted. There's a difference." "Not to me, there isn't." "He likes you, dear. That was the most alive I've seen a Thornfield duke in 3 generations. He's a duke. I'm a farrier's daughter who can't read." He was amusing himself. Lady Marchmont reached across the carriage and took Wren's hand. Her old fingers were cool and firm and surprisingly strong. "He kept your flower," she said quietly. Men who amuse themselves don't keep flowers. Wren pulled her hand away and pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the carriage window. Outside, London slid past, grey and indifferent, and utterly uninterested in the fact that her chest ached over a man she'd known for 10 days. The letter arrived 2 days later. She couldn't read it. She stood in Lady Marchmont's parlour, holding the heavy cream paper with its embossed crest, and felt the full weight of her illiteracy for the first time in years. Not the practical inconvenience. She'd managed without reading her entire life. But the specific cruelty of wanting desperately to know what someone had written and being locked out of his words by her own hands. He'd known she couldn't read it alone. That was the point, she realized. He was forcing her to share it, to let someone in, the way she'd forced honesty on him by simply being herself. "Shall I?" Lady Marchmont held out her hand. Wren gave her the letter. "Dear Miss Marsh," Lady Marchmont read. Her voice was careful, stripped of its usual irony. "I should have told you. Not because you deserved a title instead of a name. You deserve better than either. But because you gave me honesty, and I repaid it with a mission. I am not asking your forgiveness. I am asking for the chance to earn it. My niece Poppy arrives tomorrow. She is 8. She bites. She has thrown 3 books at her current governess and refuses to learn to ride because she is terrified of horses and too proud to admit it. I need help. Real help. Not the kind money can buy. Lady Marchmont paused, and something shifted in her expression. I need someone who knows horses and isn't afraid of being bitten. If you come as yourself. That is the only person I want in my house. Julian. She lowered the letter. Not the Duke of Thornfield. Just Julian. Wren took the letter back, traced the lines of handwriting she couldn't decipher with one rough fingertip. I should say no, she said. You should. He's a duke. He is. It can't possibly work. Probably not. Wren folded the letter and pressed it into the book she kept in her pocket, the one filled with wildflowers. A book she couldn't read, stuffed with flowers from roadsides and hedgerows, now holding a duke's words she also couldn't read. I'm going, she said. I know, dear. Poppy Harcourt was 8 years old, 4 feet tall, and had the diplomatic skills of a small siege engine. You're not pretty, she announced when Wren entered the nursery. Neither are you, Wren said. Poppy blinked, then grinned, the grin of someone who had been waiting her entire short life for an adult who would fight back. Uncle Julian said you know about horses. I do. I hate horses. No, you don't. You're scared of them. That's different. Poppy's grin vanished. Her lower lip pushed forward into a fortress. I am not scared. You are, and that's fine. They're enormous, and they have teeth, and they're much stronger than you. Being scared is intelligent. Being too proud to say so is stupid. The silence lasted 4 full seconds. Then Poppy said, Uncle Julian is stupid about you. Excuse me? He talks about you all the time. Wren this, Wren that. He pressed your flower in his special book. He only puts flowers he really likes in the special book. Wren knelt so she was at Poppy's eye level. The nursery smelled of chalk dust and beeswax and the faintly sour tang of a child's forgotten apple. Does he? He's being properly ridiculous. Poppy used the word with the careful weight of someone who had heard it aimed at herself many times, a word borrowed from the adult world and worn like armor. That's what Nanny says. Nanny might be right. Are you going to teach me about horses? Only if you stop throwing books at your governess. Poppy considered this with the gravity of a judge weighing a capital case. She's boring. Most people are. That's not a reason to throw things at them. What's a good reason to throw things? Self-defense, and only if your aim is good. Poppy laughed. It was a child's laugh, unguarded, total, enormous. The kind of sound that could crack something open in your chest if you weren't careful. Wren was not careful. She felt the crack. Julian appeared in the doorway. He'd been listening. She could tell by his posture, the careful stillness of someone who didn't want to interrupt something fragile. She's staying, Poppy announced. She said I'm not pretty, and she's going to teach me horses. Julian looked at Wren. She looked back. The anger was still there, simmering. But underneath it, something else had taken root. The inconvenient warmth she'd felt in the park. The turning over in her chest that she could no longer pretend was indigestion. Thank you for coming, he said. I came for Poppy, not for you. I know. But when she passed him in the doorway, her shoulder brushed his arm, and neither of them moved away. His coat smelled of pressed flowers and soap, and she held her breath until she was 3 steps past him, and then let it out too fast, and knew he'd heard. 2 weeks. Lady Marchmont had all but pushed her out the door. "Go, girl. I survived 60 years without a companion. I can manage a fortnight. Besides, you're useless to me, lovesick." Wren spent 2 weeks at Thornfield House, and in that time the house became something it hadn't been before. Loud. Poppy's laughter in the stable yard, Wren's voice carrying from the paddock, the sound of a child saying, "I touched his nose, I touched his nose," and crying, not from fear, but from the sheer overwhelm of bravery accomplished. Wren held Poppy while she sobbed into her shoulder, and Julian watched from the stable door with an expression that made Wren's hands shake so badly she had to press them flat against Poppy's back to hide it. They talked. Not about the lie. That wound was healing on its own, slowly, the way real wounds do, not with grand gestures, but with small, consistent acts of truth. He showed her who he actually was. Not the Duke, not just Julian. The real man. The one who pressed flowers and worried about his tenants' leaking roofs, and sat up late reading aloud to Poppy because Poppy couldn't sleep without a story, and her governess refused to do voices. Julian did voices. Terrible, committed, deeply undignified voices. Wren stood outside Poppy's bedroom door one evening and listened to the Duke of Thornfield growl like a bear and squeak like a mouse and speak in the high, warbling register of an elderly witch, and she pressed her forehead against the wall and felt her anger dissolve into something far more dangerous. One evening she found him in the library. He sat at the desk with a book of botanical illustrations open before him, copying something onto small cards in his careful handwriting. "What are you doing?" she asked from the doorway. "Making you a reading system." He held up a card without turning around. On one side, a pressed clover. On the other, the word clover in large, clear letters. "Start with the flowers you know. Match the word to the thing. You already know 200 plants by sight and smell. You just need to connect them to the marks on paper." Wren crossed the room and took the card. The clover was real, one she recognized from the park, from the day they'd walked beside the Serpentine. He'd matched it exactly. Her throat closed. Her eyes burned. She gripped the card hard enough to bend it. "You don't have to use them," he said quickly, turning now, reading her face with sudden alarm. "I only thought, no one has ever done this for me." She turned the card over, then back. The clover on one side, its name on the other. A bridge between the world she knew and the one she'd been locked out of. "No one ever thought I was worth teaching." "That," Julian said quietly, "is the single most incorrect thing anyone has ever said in this room. And my grandfather once declared in this very chair that France was a myth." She laughed, a wet, unsteady laugh. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. His thumb traced the ridge of callus where the farrier's rasp sat, the roughness that mapped her palm like a second language. "These hands," he said, "are my favorite thing in London." She pulled away, not because she wanted to, but because if she didn't, she would do something irreversible. And she was not ready to be irreversible with him. Not yet. Not until she was sure. The autumn ball, the final event of the season, Lady Whitmore's annual triumph of silk and judgment, and the precise calibration of who belonged and who did not. Julian asked her to attend, not as Lady Marchmont's companion, not as the farrier's daughter from the country, as his guest. She said yes before she could stop herself. Pure wrecker, pure impulse, the word leaving her mouth while her brain was still assembling its objections. The ballroom was the same one from her first night in London. The Countess of Ashfield lent her rooms for the season's grandest occasions, and Lady Whitmore had claimed them for the finale. Same chandeliers, same marble, same perfumed heat that pressed against the skin like a warm hand. But this time, she walked in on the arm of the Duke of Thornfield, and the room went silent. 300 people turned. 300 pairs of eyes performed the same calculation. Her plain dress, her ungloved hands, her impossible position beside the most eligible man in England. The whispers began before they'd crossed the threshold. Lady Whitmore materialized from the crowd like a warship emerging from fog. She was beautiful, immaculate, dressed in ivory silk that probably required 3 servants and an engineering degree to assemble. "Your Grace." She curtsied to Julian. A perfect curtsy, the kind Wren would never achieve if she practiced for a century. "What a lovely surprise. And you've brought—" She let her gaze land on Wren and rest there with the careful weight of a verdict. "Miss Marsh, isn't it? Lady Marchmont's companion?" "Yes," Wren said. "How brave of you to come." The word brave was doing a tremendous amount of work. It meant wrong. It meant unwanted. It meant you don't belong here, and we both know it. And I am saying this with a smile so that no one can accuse me of cruelty. Julian's hand tightened on Wren's arm. She felt him coiling, gathering words, preparing to step between her and the blade. She squeezed his wrist once. "Don't. This is mine." "I can't read," Wren said. Her voice carried. She hadn't meant it to, but she was a farrier's daughter, and farriers learned to project over the sound of hammering iron and stamping hooves. "I can't dance. I can't curtsy properly. I can't do a single thing that anyone in this room considers important." The silence deepened, spread outward from them in rings, like a stone dropped in still water. Lady Whitmore's smile sharpened to a point. "But I can shoe a horse in under 8 minutes, Wren continued. "I can set a broken bone. I can tell you the name of every wildflower between here and Yorkshire by sight and smell alone." She looked at Lady Whitmore, looked directly into those perfect porcelain blue eyes. "And I can tell when someone is miserable, even when they're smiling perfectly. Especially then." Lady Whitmore's smile cracked. Not shattered, cracked. A hairline fracture in the facade, visible for one instant before she repaired it with the speed of long practice. But Wren had seen it, and the room had seen Wren see it. "You are being," Lady Whitmore began. "Honest," Wren said. "I'm being honest. I know it isn't done properly here, but I'm told that's what I do best." Julian, beside her, made a sound that was half laugh, half breath, half something she would think about for days. He turned to the orchestra. "Would you play a waltz?" he called. The orchestra played. Julian offered his hand. Wren took it. "I can't dance," she whispered. "I know. Neither can I, really. I've been performing competence for years." They danced. It was terrible. She stepped on his feet twice, the second time hard enough that he winced. He led her into a column. She laughed so hard she forgot the 300 people watching, forgot the whispers, forgot everything except his hand on her waist and the absurdity of a farrier's daughter waltzing with a duke, and both of them being genuinely, spectacularly bad at it. Poppy, who had been smuggled in by a sympathetic footman and was standing beside the potted palms in a nightgown she'd refused to change out of, clapped wildly from the edge of the dance floor. "They're doing it wrong!" she announced to the Marquis of Pemberton, who happened to be standing nearest. "They're doing it properly wrong." And somehow, against every rule and expectation and social law that governed this room, people began to smile. Not the practiced smiles. The other kind, the startled, reluctant, human kind. Wren found her in the ladies' retiring room. Not Poppy, not Lady Marchmont. Miss Arabella Whitmore, the season's undisputed diamond, the perfect daughter of the perfect mother. 22 years old, exquisite, immaculate, and crying into a handkerchief so fine that Wren could see through it. "I'm sorry about my mother," Arabella said, dabbing at her eyes with the kind of careful, practiced motions that suggested she'd done this many times before. "She's horrible. She's been horrible my entire life, and I've spent 22 years learning to be exactly like her. And I hate it. I hate every minute of it." Wren sat down on the settee beside her. The fabric was cool silk. The room smelled of rosewater and powder, and someone else's perfume. "Why are you telling me this?" Wren asked. "Because you said the true thing. Out there, in front of everyone." Arabella's voice cracked along the same fault line as her mother's smile. "Nobody ever says the true thing here. We just perform. Every day, every ball, every morning call. Performing and performing until you can't remember what's underneath the performance." Wren thought about Julian's words on the terrace, a lifetime ago. "The most honest thing anyone has given me in years." "You could stop," Wren said. "I can't. You don't understand what it's like." "I understand better than you think." Wren looked at her. "I spent 24 years being told I was less because I can't read. You've spent 22 being told you're nothing without perfection. Different cage, same lock." Arabella stared at her. Then she laughed. A wet, ungraceful, entirely genuine laugh that sounded nothing like her mother's. "Teach me," she said. "How to stop pretending." "I can't teach that. You just stop. One day you open your mouth and say the actual thing instead of the pretty version of the thing. It's terrifying. Your voice shakes. Your mother will look at you like you've broken something. And then? And then you find out who stays." Julian found her on the terrace. The same darkness, the same stone balustrade, the same October cold that smelled of dying roses and chimney smoke. She was sitting exactly where she'd sat that first night, legs dangling, borrowed shoes kicked off and balanced on the railing beside her. "You caused a riot," he said from the doorway. "I caused a conversation. Those are different." He sat beside her, close. His shoulder pressed against hers. The cold air bit at her bare arms, but she could feel his warmth through his coat and her thin dress, and it was enough. "I should be furious with you for that," he said. "Are you?" "I'm trying very hard to be, but you're making it impossible." He turned to face her. In the light from the ballroom windows she could see his expression. Open, undone, stripped of every polished surface he'd ever been taught to wear. "Wren, don't." She held up one hand. "Don't say something grand. Don't make a speech. Don't be the Duke of Thornfield right now. If you're going to say something, just say it plainly." "I love you." "Wrong order." Wren turned to face him. She took his face in both hands, her calloused, work-rough, ungloved hands against the sharp line of his jaw. He closed his eyes at her touch. "I love you. I'm saying it first because I'll say it worse and mean it more. I love you, and I can't read, and I can't dance, and I will never curtsy properly, and I will embarrass you at every single event for the rest of your life. I will say the wrong thing. I will break things. I will track stable mud into ballrooms. This is what you're getting." Julian pressed his forehead against hers. His breath was warm on her lips. His hands came up to cover hers where they held his face. "I know exactly what I'm getting," he said. "I have conditions." "Name them." "Don't try to fix me. Don't hire tutors unless I ask for them. And teach Poppy to ride properly. She's brave enough now. She just needs someone she trusts in the saddle beside her. Done. All of it. Anything. And stop hiding on terraces. You belong inside with people, even the terrible ones. Only if you're beside me." Wren kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss, or a careful one, or the kind of kiss that unfolds slowly by candlelight. It was a wrecker's kiss. Sudden, total, irreversible. Her hands still gripping his face, his arms coming around her so fast he knocked her borrowed shoes off the balustrade. They tumbled into the garden below and landed somewhere in the rosebeds with a faint double thud. "Those were borrowed," she said against his mouth. "I'll buy you new ones." "I don't want new ones. I want those ones. They're uneven and ugly and they're mine." Then I'll climb down and get them. In that coat? In any coat. In no coat. He pulled back just far enough to look at her, and his face, the Duke of Thornfield's handsome, expensive, exhausted face, was blazing with something that looked like the opposite of performance. You are the only real thing in my entire life. I am not letting you go over a pair of shoes. From somewhere below, inside the bright windows of the ballroom, Poppy's voice carried upward with the perfect clarity of a child who has never once modulated her volume. Are they kissing? I bet they're kissing. Uncle Julian is being properly ridiculous again. Wren laughed into Julian's shoulder. He pulled her closer. The October air smelled of dying roses and smoke and the first frost of the season. Properly ridiculous, he agreed against her hair. Properly, completely, irreversibly ridiculous. 6 months later, the ballroom at Thornfield House was full of wildflowers. Not hothouse roses, not imported orchids, not anything that required forcing or pretending to be something other than what it was. Foxgloves and clover and cornflowers and lavender, arranged in mismatched clay jars on every surface, spilling purple and blue and white across the same tables that had once held crystal and polished silver. Wren stood in the center of it all, attempting a curtsy. It was still terrible. Lower, Poppy instructed from the pianoforte bench, where she sat with a book open in her lap. She wasn't throwing it. She was reading it, slowly, carefully, her finger moving under each word. Wren had taught her the flower card method, and Poppy had taken to it the way she took to everything, with ferocious, stubborn determination. You have to go lower, Aunt Wren. If I go any lower, I'll fall over. Then fall over properly. Wren caught the word and smiled. Properly. It had been Lady Whitmore's weapon once, London's measuring stick, the standard Wren could never reach. Now Poppy wielded it the way Julian did, with warmth, with mischief, with the quiet understanding that properly meant nothing at all unless it meant honestly. Julian appeared in the doorway. He was carrying a new book, leather-bound, thin, with pressed flowers visible between the pages. Their collection now, not just his. Foxgloves from the terrace, clover from Hyde Park, a cornflower from their wedding. 10 minutes at the village church, Poppy as the only attendant, Lady Marchmont weeping into a handkerchief and insisting it was allergies. I made you a new card, he said, crossing the room. He held it up. On one side, a pressed foxglove, purple, slightly crushed, exactly like the first one she'd ever given him. On the other side, in Wren's own uneven, hard-won handwriting, foxglove. She'd learned that word last week. She was learning them all, one by one, on her own terms, at her own pace, starting with the flowers, because they were hers, because she'd known their faces her whole life, and now, finally, she was learning their written names. My handwriting is terrible, she said, taking the card. Your handwriting is yours. That's what matters. That's a very generous way of saying terrible. Julian crossed the room and took her hand. His thumb found the calluses that still mapped her palm. Farrier's hands, even now. She hadn't shot a horse in months, but the ridges remained, and he traced them the way he always did, like reading a language only he understood. Poppy looked up from her book with the resigned expression of a child who has witnessed this scene many times. You're going to kiss again, aren't you? Because I'm trying to read and it's very distracting when your faces go stupid. We're not kissing, Wren said. You're about to. I can always tell. Julian kissed Wren anyway. Properly. Which was to say improperly, thoroughly. With one hand still holding hers and the other cradling the flower card between them like something precious. Poppy sighed the deep sigh of the deeply burdened and returned to her book. Outside the ballroom windows, spring was turning the gardens green. Inside, the wildflowers were alive with color, and a child was reading, and a woman who couldn't curtsy was loved entirely and exactly as she was. And a duke, who had spent his life hiding on terraces, had finally, irreversibly, come inside. If you've ever been the person who didn't fit, who said the wrong thing, laughed too loud, showed up in the wrong dress, and refused to apologize for it, this story was yours. Tell me in the comments, what's the one flaw you'd never want to fix? And if you want more stories like this, subscribe. We're just getting started.